Good day, everyone. I am Brian Silverman, iSOA Group Senior Marketing Therapist, and on behalf of the iSOA team, I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy day for our first webinar in 2015 as part of our Lifecycle Webinar series. Today's topic is Grow Your Business by Harnessing the Opportunity Around the API Anarchy. We are recording today's call, so if you have any concerns, you can disconnect at this time. We will be providing access to a replay within a day or two, and you will be able to review the slides and content and also share it with your colleagues in the future. We are joined today by three outstanding presenters who will help tame the IT anarchy and, most importantly, articulate the value, the opportunity, and the solutions around API management. Our first presenter will be Cheryl Pertini, iSOA Group COO. She will give you an overview of the iSOA Group Anarchist team, and then she'll pass the baton to Scott Kreinock. He's IBM's Integration Channel Sales Leader, and I'm sure you'll appreciate his perspective on IBM, the API opportunity, and how SOA, Services-Oriented Architecture, can be part of the foundation for success. Following Scott will be the iSOA Group CTO, Brian Kadoka. He will share his recommendations, his experience and early experience with API management with customers, and best practices around implementing an API management solution. And then after that, I'll rejoin to wrap up with the Q&A. But you can enter a question in the WebEx window at any time, and we'll address those at the end of the webinar as well. So Cheryl, please take it away, and let's start taming the anarchy of APIs.
Thanks a lot, Brian, and thank you, everybody, for joining. So like Brian said, I'd like to start by just giving you a brief overview of iSOA Group. We're a professional services consulting group, and we specialize in the IBM technologies around integration, security, and mobile. We're also an IBM premier partner and reseller of IBM products. We have a strong focus and a core competency in the data power technology, and we actually embarked in that space around the time IBM acquired Data Power about the end of 2005. With our strong focus in Data Power, was a natural transition for us to, flow right into API management. Another item to note is we have spoken many times at the IBM Impact conferences on Data Power. And we'll again this year at the Interconnect conference. Our session is on Thursday, February 26th. So with that brief history, I'd like to turn it over now to Scott Kreinock from IBM. Take it away, Scott.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hey, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for joining today's call. The world has come a long way in the last 20 years since the first browser became a viable way to reach content around the web. The Internet is now widely successful and now a major channel for messaging and product delivery. And mobile devices have become ubiquitous access points to the Internet. Pretty much everyone under the sun right now is creating mobile apps from a corporate perspective, accessing back-end systems in their enterprise, getting data, executing transactions, doing something. And the way you'll connect from these mobile apps into your back-end systems is through APIs. So APIs are the next evolution. APIs are taking assets from your company and not just selling them directly to the customer, as we did with the web, or you might do with your own mobile app, but making these available through other channels. Partners of your company or even public people who are writing cross-industry apps for their customers might consume your things, literally assets from your business, and drive this business into your enterprise. So therefore, expanding your marketplace. Now, APIs go far beyond mobile. So that's what's hot. Mobile's hot, and that's driving a lot of the early messaging around API economy and API management, as you've probably heard in the media. But we're also going to see a tremendous growth even beyond mobile. I'm talking about connected cars, appliances. You're probably familiar. You might even have thermostats in your home and smart home solutions. And there's also other appliances where they're communicating with various other things in different business scenarios. This is an exciting foundation for businesses to get involved. So as we move to slide 7, this API economy has changed how developers think about building apps and how organizations deploy their offerings. In essence, APIs provide businesses with a way to increase their outreach to new customers and markets, by allowing developers to leverage, publicize, combine corporate assets for broad-based consumption. Enterprises today are using APIs to support a broad range of industry in line of business functions. As of this morning, there was 12,800 public web APIs available today on the programmable web across every major vertical, including government, who are enjoying these frameworks. I'm thinking that key internal assets being exposed with APIs, everything ranges from catalogs to phone listings to insurance case information to order status data and bank loans. And so we're looking at potentially exposing assets to be exposed externally or publicly or even to specific partners of yours. And then some just internally within your organizations. An internal use could be your accounting and payroll systems could simply call a commissions API to calculate commissions instead of having business logic replicated in each system. So the number of potential applications based on these assets is practically limitless and includes everything from online phone directories and web-based underwriting applications. So as we move to slide 8, this visual shows a flow as organizations are making their business information available as business APIs to various types of developers, whether they're partners, public, private. These APIs are then consumed by developers who build their own apps for end users to use. So this supply-demand relationship creates this economy of API providers and API consumers. And we're going to be talking a lot more about API providers and API consumers in the next few minutes. As you'll see in this visual, there's a true value chain where each of the stakeholders should see value from the API. A successful API program hinges in large part of an organization's ability to create an ecosystem to drive the innovation development necessary to attract consumer interest through this value chain. So this includes ideas of what kinds of applications can be created with the API and who's the prime targets for app use are, easy access to the API, readily accessible support, robust API documentation, and other ways to expose it to an audience, such as hackathons, and testing and other tools. So moving on to slide 9, we'll touch on 3 different types of API audiences: partners, public, and private. Now, most of what's getting the buzz and all the big press in this space is public APIs, where you make your API available to anyone that wants to consume it, and that drives businesses to your enterprise. But most often, businesses might decide to start in other places. So they might start by creating a private internal API for their own app developers to consume and use assets for their own mobile apps. So, for example, a bank writing their own mobile app is often the way they were to get started. So I gave you the example before about commissions. So simply, and this is another internal example, calling a commissions API to calculate commissions instead of having business logic replicated in each system for month-end and quarterly reporting, that would be much less stressful. In this example, calculating commission API also streamlines maintenance when the commission structure needs updating because of changing an API response affects every system consuming this data the same way. You also might have a partner API that is a very quick next step, and sometimes in parallel with private internal ones, where you have a certain select set of partners that you deal with already, and it just makes sense, the consumption of information as the flow back and forth between yourself and the partners is much easier to consume. You can also do much more partner onboarding, rapid partner onboarding, to get new partners in your enterprise, which has always been a struggle for organizations in the past. So all 3 are possible, and most often people will eventually do them all. But they'll probably start with something internal, more controlled, as they get your feet wet and understanding the space to move forward. So moving to slide 10, businesses should really also look carefully at, when they move into APIs and an API management strategy, how to structure the pricing model. So there's a variety of different pricing models. I'll cover a few here. The free pricing model, giving developers ready access to the API at no cost. This puts relatively low-value asset in public domain in hopes that it's compelling enough to encourage a mass developer adoption. Different motives in terms of doing this, such as stronger customer loyalty. Also, a developer pay model. The application developer pays for the rights to use the web API. This scenario involves an asset of high value, typically a tight, concentrated prospect pool. And this is an example of this would be having the ability for credit checks or address validation, or examples where the actual developer may want to pay for this API. In the developer gets paid model, developers receive a fee for the work. This tactic provides incentives to speed up the development efforts. And in many ways, there's examples across many industries where the developer could get paid, whether it's an advertisement or using a revenue sharing or royalty model, in which they get a cut of the revenues collected. And across all of these, there's tiered pricing models. It makes lower valued assets free, but then maybe higher valued content requires a fee. And then there's an indirect model, is when the use of API achieves some goal that drives the business model, such as an increased awareness in specific content offering. Best example I could think of is eBay's API support sellers with content population, meaning create listings, upload data feeds, and then also management in terms of leaving feedback, update traffic information, managing disputes, which indirectly results in revenue. Moving to slide 11. So how do you enter this API economy space? Definitely need a complete API strategy, which addresses both API creation and how it's going to be consumed. APIs in an API economy become a product, and it should be treated as such. For example, who is the audience? What do they want to buy? What are the terms and conditions which I'm willing to sell? So this is simply product management 101. In the context of APIs as products, the most important question to ask is, why do they want to buy? How do I get as many people as possible to use my API? This transcends APIs as IT connection points and instead asks, how can I make my APIs a delightful experience that people will want to use? So the discovery, composition, and deployment of APIs on the consumer side, the consumption side, is also critical because that is where you're able to deliver a differentiated experience. And we're going to move into slide 12 here, where we go through a quick scenario. So this introduces the idea of a company, Cars.com, not your company, and I'm assuming that you all know who Cars.com is, or certainly can guess from the name that it's a website that helps you buy a car, whether it's online or through a mobile app. So Cars.com will build a value-added experience for someone trying to buy a car consuming APIs for various other businesses. They will need to go to auto manufacturers to get the list of cars that are offered, information about those cars as people are trying to make a decision of what car they're interested in purchasing. And then they need to see where this person is actually geographically located, so they can find the auto dealerships that are near them and can see the cars available within those auto dealerships, and through APIs what the pricing is. And this all helps the customer make decisions on purchasing a car. In addition, we could also access bank APIs to get a car loan and insurance APIs to get auto insurance if that's what's needed. So Cars.com can provide a value-added experience by using all these APIs from other businesses, adding value to their own and supplying a one-stop shop for their customers. As a consumer of APIs, on the right side, there are benefits to these applications of being able to quickly add new things. Obtain new information. If a car model comes out, they don't have to change everything. It's automatically on their site. If there's a new dealership, they may have to invoke a new API, and that's fine. It can be quickly done. So we can see that there's a lot of benefits to these application assemblers as the API consumer. As we move to slide 13, it introduces the other side of the coin. So we're looking back at the provider's perspective. They're not only dealing with Cars.com. So if we're looking at a bank and their APIs, they're also providing APIs to other application assemblers. So Zillow.com, a real estate app that helps you find houses and things like that. You might need a mortgage for that one. Mint is a financial application that can consolidate all your different accounts, show this an end user. And so again, we can access different account information from the bank for that one. So this macro level scenario shows the provider of an API is able to expand their market. They're trying to get not just one additional app assembler, but therefore many. And they're able to expand their marketplace well beyond that. So if you just think about this from a bank perspective, the bank is not going to write a car shopping app, right? That's not their core competency. They might write a bank app that lets you deal with their own bank accounts, and that's certainly viable from an API perspective as well. But when you start thinking about expanding your marketplace to other industries like car shopping and real estate and so on, I can now get my bank as a front and center offering to a lot wider audience. So as we move to slide 14, everything we just talked about is the tip of the iceberg. To an API consumer, a great developer portal is everything. To an API provider, having a community-centric developer portal is only the tip of the iceberg. This is how people or companies or consumers will see APIs from an external perspective. Under the waterline, there are business and IT concerns that make APIs practical to deploy and operate. Internally, there's an infrastructure that needs to run, and so we need some way of providing this infrastructure that can protect those systems of record from, excessive attacks and utilizations. We also need some kind of rate limiting, so where people can sign up for a certain number of transactions that I know can handle the back end and plan for it in advance. And then we need to be able to deploy and secure versions and control of this whole environment. Everything under the covers here. So does this sound familiar? APIs are extending your enterprise into new markets, not just another interface with your back-end systems. If you think about what's going on here for the past 10, 12 years with service-oriented architecture, SOA, it's been a lot about integrating applications within your company's business. You have a lot of company assets, applications, databases that are running your business on a day-to-day basis. They take transactions in, they make you money. These are very important to your business. And SOA is about encapsulating some of these capabilities so you're able to build new functionality within your business to take advantage of these older apps and moving that forward into new things you want to accomplish within your business. So you might use an ESB or Enterprise Service Bus to connect your internal systems together. You might have even used that to connect systems in the cloud. All these systems are running your business. We refer to these systems as systems of record. It's very important that they don't go down. If they're out of action, your company isn't making money. So we're very concerned about the rate of change in these systems. They need to have change. They need to be governed, and there's a lot of governance control around the implementation and change of those systems. In parallel, we now have mobile and social and public clouds and all kinds of things that are happening at an incredible rate of change. New mobile apps are coming out, even from a single company. They might have multiple times per month, a new version of an app. It's so lightning fast. The amount of change is happening in an environment that if we needed to go back and change systems of record every single time we need to make one of these changes, it would not be scalable. It would be done in a way that would potentially introduce bad things on the system of record. So to enable the systems of engagement to change rapidly while controlling the back-end systems of record, we introduce API management and integrate the integration gateway and the idea of APIs being exposed in a controlled manner from your existing systems of record so the systems of engagement side can consume all these APIs, use them in a rapid fashion to come out with new and enhancing offerings all the time. So API management is really a natural extension of SOA. A common myth is SOAP is dead. APIs are always REST. With the growth of mobile, REST is the current most popular protocol for the easily consumable API. But nothing in the concept of API requires it to be more based on a particular protocol. There are reasons why the industry has invented more than one protocol in the first place. Good API designers choose the right one for the right purpose. Generally, REST interfaces are excellent for human consumption. They are current preference of mobile developers. But REST interfaces tend to be chatty, and though they're extendable, they don't often carry enough strongly typed complex data structures. SOAP interfaces are great for system-to-system integration, and IT operation teams prefer them due to their less chatty nature and more precise data structures. In addition, we have MQTT, which is now gaining traction in terms of the Internet of Things, where bandwidth and battery life are sometimes concerns. In your backend, if your backend is a SOAP service, then it's extremely easy to create and manage SOAP API proxy on top. It's much easier than defining a whole new REST API, and in fact not required, making the case for SOAP-based APIs. So pick the proper binding for the purpose. And of course focus on your audience rather than always defaulting to REST. At a minimum, a good API platform should, just like IBM's API management platform, support both REST and SOAP as the API protocol. And here's a view as we move to slide 18 in terms of a view from IBM. in terms of your services, as we discussed in terms of SOA, at the bottom of the screen here. And as APIs are truly an extension of those services, as you start reaching into the marketplace, gaining an ecosystem of developers that can then develop apps and reach the appropriate channels to expand your marketplace. And as a wrap-up before handing the microphone to Brian, we spoke about APIs and the API economy. API management solution for an API creation and maintenance, and data integration, and security and performance is critical. The solution will also provide analytics that give your business statistics on how many calls your APIs receive from which app. This is particularly important if you want to charge the developer for the usage of your API. The solution will allow you to publicize your API to energize the development community to create innovative apps fueled by your data. Has your business considered exposing data through APIs? Are you considering using an API management solution? I'll be turning the microphone over to Brian Katioka to take a closer look at the IBM API management solution. Thanks for your time today. So Brian, I'm going to hand you the slides.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. Brian Katioka here. For the next few minutes, I'm going to review some important API management best practices that will help you prevent API anarchy. So let's review some of those best practices. So anti-anarchy begins with the following API management best practices. So you can broadly categorize these into four aspects. The business aspects where, Scott talked a lot about the goals, and that's kind of what you would want to specify there and define. The other aspect would be the development side, understanding the relationships between the APIs and services and creating manageable APIs. The third would be the security aspect, where we would be handling the ways of applying security to our APIs. And then finally, the publishing aspect, where we want to make sure that we have the capabilities around versioning, lifecycle management, deployment, metrics, and development. So let's take a look at the lay of the land here. This is a sort of a typical API topology. I'm showing two types of consumers, those that are out in the internet and consumers that are actually within your trusted domain. You might notice on the far right that we have an ESB in here, and this is where Scott was talking about the SOA environment. We obviously be running SOA there with our existing services. And you notice that we don't have the ESB inside the DMZ. I'll talk about that in a little bit. For our API gateway that's out there in the DMZ, we show some important capabilities, such as having a secure gateway and presenting a developer's portal for our consumers, supporting version processing and gathering analytics. We support lifecycle capabilities, and there's publishing of documentation and things that the developer will need to know. So let's go through the best practices. Okay. Best practice number one, I got labeled here as know thyself. So as Scott mentioned earlier, one of the best practices is to know what the business and its drivers will be. So you need to know what your business model is going to be. And so what are your goals? You have to ask yourself, are you trying to establish a clientele of developers that are creating mobile applications? Or will you be publishing APIs that will improve your brand awareness? And perhaps you're also hoping to generate new revenue streams. So once you understand these goals, you need to determine how you want to monetize them. So are you willing to give it away for free? That's something that happens a lot here in Silicon Valley. You give it away for free and you try to get market share. Or are you expecting to pay the developers because maybe they're putting advertisement on their application? So those are a couple of ways to do it. Or are you expecting to have the developers pay you for using your service? So those are things that you'll need to start to understand even prior to developing your external-facing APIs, or even your internal ones if you're dealing with your internal organization. So knowing what you want and how to get it is an important best practice. Another important best practice is developing and creating manageable APIs, and that's kind of the developer aspect that I was talking about. So best practice number 2 is developing an approach to establish manageable APIs. So how do you create a manageable API? Well, there are some things that you should consider. One is, as you're developing your APIs, you're going to be building interfaces, you're going to be creating documentation, you're going to be creating samples. So those are things that you're going to have to make sure you have a way of managing. Okay. Other things is, how to advertise your APIs. You're going to put them out in the developer portal. Okay, you want to consider that. You also want to set up some kind of subscription model that we previously discussed and Scott also discussed. You might also want to establish service level agreements for your APIs. How many can they access? Kind of what kind of throughput do you want? Okay. You also want to determine how to monetize it, and you want to set up analytics so you can track those things. And then finally, you want to make sure that your APIs are secure. So this all goes within the management side. And what the screen is showing you is the IBM API Management has these components, and they actually sit and work in conjunction with the Data Power Gateway. So you get all of the security and control and metrics driven by and through the Data Power Gateway. This is a little bit different than placing an enterprise service bus inside the DMZ and allowing that to happen. This is primarily a gateway that will allow you to proxy the information back into your back-end systems. So let's take a look at how we apply security. Best practice number 3 is managing your security. There we go. Okay. So what I'm showing here are some screens from the IBM API Management Systems that allow you to set security settings within the API. Some key points here are you have to remember that your APIs are part of your enterprise big picture. So the security that you're applying to your enterprise has to also fit within your API security model. Okay. You'll need to consider how to authenticate and authorize your services. You should consider how the consumer will request things like access tokens. And are you going to be using OAuth or basic authentication? Those are things that come to mind. You also need to think about, will I be using client credentials or user ID and password? It's also important that you document how to handle these tokens so that the developer who will be using your APIs can easily integrate with them and understand what you're trying to do here. Okay. And then finally, you might want to make sure that they're always using SSL and that they treat their tokens, like their passwords. You need to protect them and make sure that no one else gets hold of them. And then finally, consider things like fine-grained access to your APIs. Will you be using a particular OAuth associated with a scope? Or will you be setting up claims-based identity with other types like SAML or Kerberos? So how do we get this type of information out to the developers? Well, we want to publish them. So best practice number 4 is you need to be and do a great job of publishing, okay? Publishing is all about providing an interface where information is readily available. So when you select an API management platform, you should ensure that it provides, user management, self-service, maybe there's user profile management that's built within. And it should provide the API publications, documentation out there to the developers. You should also consider setting up the API security in your API management system. It should be set up to do that already for you. And it should allow you to configure and review metrics. Okay? So you need to be able to see what's happening and get feedback from your consumers. And it's also great if you could set up service level agreements that will throttle and set rate limits. And that's kind of what I'm showing you here on this particular screen. This one is showing from an operator standpoint what the most active APIs that are running. And then the bottom half is just kind of setting rate limits for the particular application. Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into publishing. Okay. So your APIs must support versioning. Okay. To support the API evolution, you need to support backward compatibility, and you should establish rates and throttling by versions. Okay. So here I'm showing how easy it is in the IBM API Management to support versioning. So you can have multiple versions. You can create a new clone of an API off of a previous version. So, you know, this system makes it very, very easy for you to continue to add things on based on other versions. Also, another aspect of versioning is adopting a strategy on how you're going to version. There's various mechanisms that you can use. You can choose from using a parameter, or have a version as part of the URI, or embedding a date within the URI as a version, or maybe setting a version within a header. So you would need to determine that as you go forward. Now, what about our developer? Okay. Well, you know, we gotta have the backs of the developer. They're the ones that are going to be using the system and using the API management capabilities, so they can get the information and build additional applications around your APIs. So we have to have their back. So one thing that we need to make sure that our API management system provides is the ability to provide good documentation. So that would be the portal that allows you to enter in documentation about the API. And then you would like lots of API samples, anything to make it easier for the developer to take your APIs and get their applications out. Another really helpful thing is making sure that they have an embedded testing facility. Okay, on the screen here, I'm kind of showing some of the capabilities of the IBM API Management System to do some testing and to get some feedback. And then you want to be able to put it within a sandbox environment where you can test your API without actually putting it out in production. Other nice things are tool integration. And recently there was a little Twitter announcement that went out that said, now you can test your APIs with a new SOAP UI Pro plugin to import, export REST SOAP APIs with IBM API Management. All of my previous experience, not only just doing stuff in SOA and with REST, is I pretty much always use SOAP UI. So this is a really, really handy tool that's been added on so that anyone who's using the IBM API Management System can get integration with SOAP UI. And there's been some other improvements also with a curl tool that will generate curl for you so you can do some testing. So all these things are important to help the developer and actually make them want to use your system because you've provided these tools. Okay, so how do you know if your strategy is working? Well, you got to have analytics. Okay, and I like to use the analogy of the movie about Moneyball. For those who don't know about it, Moneyball was about the Oakland A's and how they use analytics to build a successful, cost-effective organization based on those analytics. So, the old saying, you can't manage what you can't measure. So what we want to make sure that we have in your API management system is the proper analytics. analytics to verify your investment, analytics to understand your consumers, a way of measuring and managing versions and deprecations, and allowing your analytics to help you plan better. So these are all things that are extremely important as a feedback mechanism, not only to the consuming developers, but the business itself. So let's talk a little bit now about deployments. So you need to plan for your deployment. Okay, what I'm showing here is the IBM API Management System provides you plenty of options for deployment. You can do it on-premise private, off-premise private, off-premise by itself, or you can set a hybrid. So there's various ways that you can choose which way that you want to deploy your application, and IBM supports 4 of those right now. Now, I mentioned earlier talking about ESBs. Well, you might wonder why, if you have an ESB, why can't I, use it out there instead of like a gateway? And what's the difference? Well, one, the question is, do you really want that kind of complexity at the edge of the network if you were to put your ESB out there? And if you do, how easy is it to scale? Okay, is it easier than a gateway product where with the data power you can just put another one out there and it'll load balance itself and you'll get double the throughput? Okay, and do you really want your ESV into DMZ? So that's another big question. So a better choice is to put in an API gateway in your DMZ. Why? Well, it's a reverse proxy. Okay, it also allows separation of concerns, and then you can also have your security closer to the edge of the network, as well as you can do protocol transformations at the edge, which will provide you a lot more flexibility. So everything in systems evolve, and so how do we handle specific edge cases? Well, with the data power gateway, you have these advanced capabilities where you can use the gateway to solve these edge cases. Some examples might be, you might have a special transformation, or you might have some other unique authentication and authorization that you need to go through. Okay, and then maybe there's some kind of filtering that you do. Maybe there's schema validations using JSON. So those are some examples of things that might be kind of a little bit unique in your situations, and having a gateway product underneath that's got the power of data power, it allows you to have that flexibility to extend the product. Okay. So what are the key takeaways from this best practice thing? Well, number one, fight the IT anarchy and utilize best practices for API management. Okay. And number two, APIs are business drivers. They're not technical solutions or revolutions. Make your business more effective. Number three, build trust by effectively integrating consumers with proper best practices. And then, focus on Moneyball. Learn from your analytics, improve your product. So transformations is, a final thought for this is we want to remove the chaos and confusion, the disorganization and the turmoil and the disorder, and come to a harmonious, calm, and orderly world of API management. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you and Cheryl and Scott for doing such a great job helping tame the anarchy, if you will, around API management. I always think about iSOA Group and actually having the focus that you articulated so well, as Scott and Cheryl did, about how do you bring the business value to technology, whether it's something, quote, new in the market around this API economy, leveraging things like services-oriented architecture, and helping companies gain the real business value from technical solutions and working with IBM as well. As we look at, to wrap up this webinar, the first thing we think you should do at iSOA Group is spend some time with Brian and Cheryl and I on the phone and think about what the lifecycle where the opportunity review might be. Should you be starting out consuming APIs? If you look at Scott's example around cars.com or integrating a finance API from another source, or should you actually be provisioning your own API in the marketplace? Once you've determined with us and within your own internal team what the right opportunity may be, spend time with us on a solution assessment. What are the right technologies? Are there things like data power, the IBM API management solution? What are the right development environments to make sure, as Brian articulated, you leverage those best practices to make your API management environment successful? And then last, once we've all agreed collectively what that solution might be, work with the iSOA group and IBM and maybe do a proof of technology to show the value. Because what we know, and you all know, that first time you go to deploy an API environment, leveraging and show real business value, that's when you're going to be able to keep growing and adding and getting the evolution into this API economy that Scott talked about. So last but not least, we're talking about controlling the anarchy. Brian and Cheryl and I are going to help control that anarchy all the way to Las Vegas. We're going to be at Interconnect. We hope all of you will be as well. Brian is joining a customer in a presentation on the 26th around REST integration and CORS integration with data power, legacy systems, and mobile. And Cheryl and I are going to be running around Vegas, if you will. We've got some new T-shirts. If any of you know Cheryl and her creativity around T-shirts at IBM conferences, we've got some good ones. So please reach out to us and let us help you. So, Jonah, we'd like to open it up for questions, please.
Okay, if you would like to ask a question on the telephone, please press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, that is star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Your first question comes from the line of Lou. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you. Brian, should a company implement an API strategy for internal use?
Yeah, good question. Having an API strategy shouldn't limit you just to external users. So with all the best practices I just mentioned, most, if not all, are valuable for internal use. For example, it's always good to have documentation for your developers, so who wouldn't want the ability to look up existing services to utilize internally? Maybe you want to use APIs within different divisions or different organizations within your organization. So I think that's a good thing. Also, internally, you could also set up maybe to monetize it, set up a chargeback instead, so that internal customers can use the APIs and get an idea, okay, well, how many of those am I using? And maybe there might be the metrics to say, hey, wow, we're not even using these anymore, and we maybe should deprecate them or sunset them. So there's lots of good reasons to implement internally, and not to mention it's a great way to validate your strategy is well-defined and do something prior to exposing them externally. Okay.
So while we're waiting for additional questions, we have one posted to us directly on chat. Scott, do you see companies looking at a provisioning solution to start or more consuming APIs as the way to get their feet wet into the API environment?
That's a good question. So I think a lot of times they go hand in hand, but with the astronomical growth of app dev for mobile and the community of developers across the globe, we see the consumption of APIs being used the most, because of that app dev for mobile. That said, provisioning is really taking off, and I would say that though a lot of the hype is around exposing your services and assets externally, is a lot of the use cases we see just based on the question that Brian just addressed. Often for internal use, whether it's app dev within your organization to get a mobile app out there, or even chargeback across various units within your organization. So I said, I guess my answer would be it would really depend on your organization. Most organizations are actually doing both. So doing consumption and provisioning. In terms of, but it would really, as we've, I think the theme throughout this whole webinar really is, what is your strategy? Are you trying to, open yourself up to the marketplace, expose your brand more, essentially generate new revenues? Are you trying to, communicate better, internally? That's when, I think the provisioning is important. That said, as your internal teams are creating applications for mobile, if you're trying to differentiate yourself, back to that cars.com example, right? If you can add features that are outside your core competencies with APIs, that's where consuming them would come into play. So it really depends on what your goals are around your API strategy.
So, Jana, do we have any other questions on the phone?
No, there are no further questions at this time.
Okay, we have one more online, and that is Brian Kadoka. What if we already have data power, and now we're looking to see if we can leverage that further for API management? Is there something we need to think about?
Well, for when you use the IBM API management, it actually runs on top of data power. So a value prop is that you already own data power now, so the API management system will easily integrate it, and you don't need to actually purchase the data power side. There's a number of other things that you get. Obviously, I mentioned some of them, the edge cases, and be able to utilize data power to supplement and maybe connect to various other kinds of authentication authorization engines, maybe do some other special transformations. So if you already have data power, you've already got a lot of things all set up, right? You already know how to configure and monitor and administer data power. It's probably already built and put into your DMZ, so all of that has been taken care of. And all you really need to do now is lay down the API management tooling, and you're ready to go.
So, John, are there any questions online?
No, there are no further questions.
Well, on behalf of the iSOA Group team, Scott Kreinach with IBM, and we want to thank you all for attending our webinar. We look forward to seeing you at Interconnect, and look forward to our next Lifecycle Webinar, which will be, we'll post more information post-Interconnect. So if you have any questions, you have all of our contact information on the first slide, and we'll be sending you all an email as soon as the replay is available for you all to access. Thanks again, and have a great day.